Sarah, welcome back to the show.
Justin, I'm so excited for our conversation. It's been too long. Can't
It
wait.
has been too long. Actually, it was August of 2018. So it's over 5 years since you've been on
God.
the show. Let's talk about a couple of things. I was 33 when I first interviewed you. I'm now 39. Right.
Wow.
So fast forward that I'm now married. I'm a stepfather of two. You've traveled the world.
Love
And
it.
more importantly, I think a really cool thing, because last time you were on, we talked about vision boards and manifesting, and your book had just come out, House of Believe Receive, which is your first of now 3 books. So
Right.
you've birthed 2 books since then.
I have working on the 4th now.
which is amazing. But I think the really cool part, to kind of tie it back to the first conversations, when we spoke 5 years ago, you had manifested over 70 things from your vision boards, and now you're over 150, maybe even over 200 at this point.
Yeah, I lost count.
Yeah, which when you think about it, like if you break that down, that's something like one a month minimum.
It's
one
crazy.
a month.
It's
So
crazy.
talk a little bit about that, the idea that you're truly living your dream, not only once in a blue moon, not only once in a lifetime, but once or 2 times a month over the last 5 years. Like, what is that like to live that type of life?
It's so crazy because when I started doing this and did my first one back in 2009, like I had nothing. So the dream was like, hey, anything is better than what I have today. And so I look at that first board, and there were some big dreams on it, but it was the stretch of my dream balloon, right? Like, and now I look back, I'm like, oh girl, you were so cute. Because I've been doing it, in January every year since. And the reason why I do that is because it helps me to push forward. It helps me to continue to check myself and make sure that I'm resonating with my dreams and I'm still on the path that I want to be on, and then forces me to push it bigger, push it to the scary place, push it to the place that I see no path to. And then the crazy thing happens is you start living it in all these various ways. Like you said, it's I think I've manifested probably 70% of 8 or 9 boards at this point.
Wow.
And that might be like, oh, cool, those are things. No, I'm talking about dramatic life changes, dramatic life upgrades, dramatic lifestyle upgrades. I mean, when I started this, I was no joke on food stamps. I had an eviction notice on my door. I was making just enough money to pay daycare and rent, and that was absolutely it. I'd been living like that for almost a year. So, literally anything, just being able to pay the bills on a monthly basis was the dream back then. And since then, to have ascended the corporate ladder, which I did for about 7 years, and then to leave that to start my own business. I've started 2 businesses in the last 6 years, and I've taken my kids to 6 countries and, had retreats at several places around the world. And, like you said, 3 books and whatever else. It's surreal on so many levels, but there's a rap song that says something along the lines of like, if you ask me, would I ever be here? I'd say, yeah. I mean, I've been living it in my mind for 10 years. Of course I thought I would be here. I actually probably thought I'd be a lot further along like everyone else does.
Yeah. What's the quote? Like we severely overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate what we can do in 10. Right.
Yeah.
And so like what you've been able to create over the last, 15 years of your life is nothing short of amazing. But what I love about you is that you're a dreamer. You constantly think of the next big thing, the next great adventure, the next thing you want to experience. And I love that about you. And you talk about stretching. What's the term you use? Stretching your balloon or something along those lines?
I always think of your dream as a balloon. Lots of people can't dream, and it took me a long time to realize that about 50% of the population is not a dreamer and does not know how to do that. And so I liken it to those old school balloons that you had to blow up, and it was really hard in the beginning, but it gets better and better and easier as it goes. But it takes intention. It takes actually like sitting down and doing the work and saying, what do I want in my life? What's the best case scenario of all those things? What if all that happened? How would I feel? How would it impact my life? What would change? Why would that be a good thing? Is there a part of that could be a bad thing? Let me think of that too, right? So it's it's planning your life the way that we plan super mundane things, but we never think to plan our entire life, right? Which just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, you spoke to my mastermind and you talked about dreamers and thinkers and the difference. And I always thought of myself as a dreamer because I can visualize what I want. But I
Right.
realized after your explanation that I'm a thinker. Like it's
Yeah.
easy for me to execute, but it's hard for me to continuously dream up that next big thing because people are always like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? You know, people ask that question all
Right.
the
Right.
time,
Right.
and I go, I don't really know. Like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just one step at a time. So what would you say to somebody who considers themselves a thinker? How can they begin to dream for themselves and start to get uncomfortable?
Yeah, such a good question. Because, like I said, probably about 50% of your listeners fall into that same category. I think, and especially as adults, even if you started out as a dreamer, you get to adulthood and you're kind of a cynic, right? You're like, hey, a lot of those dreams I had as a kid didn't really materialize for me. So I'm gonna, get on board with the realistic side of things. And the first thing that I say is, number one, you have to kind of analytically understand it. And for a thinker, I think that's important, right? If something makes sense to your thinker mind, like it's logical, then for the most part, you can get behind it. Would you say that's true for you, right? Like
Yeah,
if
100%.
something makes sense, even if there's a component of it that's like, oh, it's a little far-fetched, but I understand how it slots into the process, then okay, I'm in it. So when you understand that the ability to dream big, for lack of a better term, on your end game, in other words, where I'm going and why, and to be able to flesh that out in a movie in your head in a really visual way that's like, oh, I want this because XYZ, because it's going to impact my family, because I'll be able to provide for them in a way that I couldn't, or because it's going to feel really good to have accomplished whatever it is. So you're fleshing it out in a way that helps your brain kind of overcome that part of a thinker that's who, what, when, where, how, why.
Yeah.
It helps you kind of override that system a little bit and just say, hey, I understand that this is step one in a 10-step process, and without it, I can't get to any of the other steps. Like,
Yeah.
I often liken it to building your dream home. And if you sat down with an architect, best architect in the world, and you said, I need you to build me my dream home. Like, there you go. That's all the information you get. He's going to look at you and say, hey, man, I need a little more information than that. Like, is this a 1-story? Is it a 10-story? What are we looking at here? And if you just come back and be like, hey, build me a dream home. Sorry, figure it out. He's going to be like, listen, go figure your shit out and then come back to me when you got it figured out. Right. So you have to have that architected plan in place before you can before you can hire a contractor or a designer, paint the house, right? You have to start with that foundational level. Like, yeah, I want a 5-bedroom house with a pool or whatever. So understanding that it's non-negotiable. I have to force myself to start to put those puzzle pieces together. I have to force myself to look 5 years into the future, 10 years into the future, and say, if I was living my best case scenario life, my only assignment is, can I define it? What is it? Because it's different for you than it is for me, than it is for every single listener, right? And comes down to that golden question, what do I want? And most people, if you ask them, will be like, yeah, I know. And then I'll ask them 2 more follow-up questions and they'll be like, blank space, because they really don't know. They don't have an idea. So that is the first thing that I would say if any of your listeners are out there in that thinker, or even, a dormant dreamer, sit down, and I call it your life plan story. Just write it out in a story. Say, this was my perfect day. I'm in the future. It just had all these amazing experiences, all these, just start drawing the picture, filling in the blanks. And that is the starting point.
Yeah, no, and it's so true. And I had a conversation yesterday. I was having a cigar with a member of my mastermind, Hamilton, and we were talking about this exact thing. And I asked him, how do you define success? And he could clearly define it. And I go, well, when you think about the success that you just told me you wanted in your life, have you already achieved it? And he's like, well, yeah, if I haven't yet, I'm really stinking close. And the funny thing about success is people always think that's the end result. But I really believe in living in your success and then chasing your quote unquote daydream, right?
Yeah.
Like those big things, right? And really defining them clearly. But the problem with the daydream is we start to create some imposter syndrome around it. Who am I to have these things? Who am I to live that type of life? And I think that's what stops a lot of people from really kind of taking that massive leap forward. So what would you say to somebody who may have imposter syndrome around these big things they may dream about and just kind of push it off to the side? How do they embrace it as, no, this can be reality?
So the first thing I want to say is, to me, imposter syndrome is a really scary word. Number one, it's a label. So the second that I say I have imposter syndrome, fucked myself up. I really have. Like, I've created a barrier that I didn't need. I've created a wall that's going to be that much harder to overcome. And I'm solidifying exactly the opposite of where I want to go. And to me, imposter syndrome is this, big, broad word that everyone loves to throw around and use. But if you break it apart, it's literally just learning. I mean, we all have had to learn every single thing. We had to learn to walk. We had to learn to ride a bike. Like, did we feel like the best bike rider in the world when we got our training wheels off as a kid? No. Like, every single thing you've ever done in your life, every human being, and I truly believe this, has felt that way when they started, whatever it was. You think back to any job you've ever had, your first week felt like that, right? Until you started learning and you started getting your hands dirty and you started asking questions and doing the thing. And then all of a sudden that starts to kind of recede and you start to build confidence and you start to build, start to feel a little bit better. So I want people to really be scared of that word, like, get it out of your orbit, get it out of your space, and instead say, I'm learning. I'm learning. Because all of a sudden, if I say I'm in a state of learning, that is a state of growth. That is a state of acknowledging the fact that there's going to be some hiccups. There's going to be some false starts. There's going to be some quote unquote failures. Because I am understanding that that is an initial part of the process. And it's okay for me to feel like that. And it's okay for me to stop and start and pivot and, get my hands dirty and figure it out. There's really no way to fast track that. So I truly believe there's no way to get over quote unquote imposter syndrome without getting your hands dirty and starting the thing, and also changing that mental dialogue. So instead of reinforcing that all the time, I'm saying to myself, I am learning, I am growing, I am proud of myself, I'm trying new things, I'm getting out there. So I'm controlling the dialogue at the same time that I'm doing the thing. Those two things push me out the door and get me towards that. And I think having that crazy big daydream, the more that I allow myself to kind of slip into it and just let it be a happy place, not a stressful place. The thinker is not welcome in there. It has to be this kind of sacred little pocket that I let myself drop into. And if it starts to make me feel stressed, I get out of it and I think about something else, right? I want to keep it in that kind of sacred little seed that needs some air and water to grow, so that it can start to change that belief system. And the crazy thing is it will. If I let it live and I give it a little air and water and I let myself think about it in that kind of happy, expectant way, then it is going to start to literally pull me through that feeling of unworthiness or who am I? And over time, slowly it's going to transition into, ooh, I want that. I don't care if nobody I know has that. I don't care if nobody I know has achieved that. I want that. And we all know that when you've decided you want something, and this is true to every listener out there, I challenge you to prove me wrong here. We know that when you want something bad enough, what? You make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And it almost becomes unconscious in a sense, right? Like when you talk about, a lot of people hear the word manifestation and people who don't understand how it actually works, they go, oh, that's just a bunch of woo woo. But what actually happens is when you're manifesting something in your life, when you visualize something at such a deep level, like I have a daily visualization practice that I tie all of my senses to the thing that I'm going after. It makes the action a lot easier, almost unconscious, right? Like almost like I'm going to take the next big leap. Before we hit record, we were talking about how we do these events, which makes us crazy people.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, okay, I want to do this thing. It's one foot in front of the other, right? It's that next step after that next step, which that's really the power of understanding and having a clear vision of where you're going. And I think also tying it to a deeper purpose. The one thing that always happened in my life is like when I chased money, it eluded the shit out of me. Like no matter what I would do, whenever I was like, oh my God, I need to pay rent, I need to make $500. I could not find that $500. Right. But when I started to tie every action to a deeper purpose, whether that be my mastermind, my live events, my speaking opportunities that I'm able to receive, like it just becomes seamless and easier. How true is that to manifesting these things in your life? Like tying it to a deeper purpose beyond just a moment or a dollar amount or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really critical. A lot of people don't know how to get there though. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times we only know what we can see and what we've experienced, and it's super limiting. And that to me is one of the reasons why forcing yourself to do the work to visualize a different outcome than you've ever known is super critical. Like, how do I make it happen if I'm not even allowing myself the opportunity to build it out of my head first, to create desire? So to take events, for example, this is such a good example, right? Like the first time anyone does an event, if you know anyone's ever done one, you go through the whole range of emotions, like or emotions, right? Like, who am I? What am I doing? This is insane. Everyone tells you you're insane. But what happens? Like the only reason why you would do it is because you had the vision in your head
Yeah.
of the day that everyone is walking in the room, of the first time there's a standing ovation, of the first time you're on the stage and you see your vision come to life. Like you're dropping into that every day on all the hard days when things are going wrong, when you're like, what am I doing? This is insane. You're always dropping into truly your why, like, and that end result. Like when I am on stage and I feel like this, I'm going to be so glad I didn't give up, right? I'm going to be so glad I went through all of this. So that whole kind of process is the exact same process you do for anything that you want. And you manifested that moment. You know, I was there at your 2019 event, you know, speaking on your stage. You manifested that. And a lot of people, like you mentioned, like think manifesting is woo-woo. It's absolutely not, at least not the way that I teach it. To me, manifesting is just the reality. So whatever anyone has ever wanted in their life started as a thought, doesn't matter what it is. And over time, it becomes the dream, it becomes a vision that creates the want and the desire. And then at that point, you're willing to do whatever it takes. You're willing to figure it out. You're willing to take action. And then at a certain point, you live the day. And to me, that's the definition of manifesting is, you know, the moment you can take the selfie of, like, here it is, it's in real life, this happened. But there's nothing like mystical or you know, crazy about it. It does have a magical element when you practice this, in the fact that, like, when I'm lining up my mindset to what I want, I'm lining up what I'm telling myself, I'm lining up my energy, and I'm coming from the pure place, like you're talking about, that place of purpose. I know why I want to do something, and that's aligned with the good part of me, not the, you know, outside, maybe materialistic driven. It's aligned with who I truly am. Then yeah, the universe is going to open a magical door here and there, and you're just going to be like, what? Mind blown, right?
Yeah.
Or it's going to give you an opportunity you never saw coming, or it's going to 10x you here. So yeah, there's like this beautiful component of like putting all those puzzle pieces together for you in a way that you just could never have imagined. But none of that happens without you showing up and doing the work.
Yeah, and it's so true. And when you talk about the event in 2019, I literally visualized every single piece of that every single day.
Probably
From
before you did a single thing, right? Before you booked a
long
hotel. Yep.
long before, you know, the music, the dancers we had, the speaker lineup is exactly what I wanted. And like, I'll still say to this day, like my events that I've thrown is probably bar none some of the best speaker lineups you could ever imagine, because that's what I've wanted to create for people. Because I was like, I've got this great opportunity to sit down and interview these people. How do I bring them to people who don't have that access, who don't have the opportunity to interview them? And that was the thought process. Now, when I was doing the event, people were like, oh, cool. Like, congratulations. Like, you know, and they were thinking 25, 50 people. And I ended up having 160 people there, which was the goal was 150. The second thing people told me were, and this is including people who've done events, you lose money the first year, you break even the second year. And by the third year, if you make money, that means your event will continue to go forward.
Yeah.
My first event, I made profit $12,000. And back then that was a lot of money for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I needed this. Right.
Yeah.
So what would you say as you're manifesting your future and visualizing what you want? What would you say to the haters, or how do you block out the people who say, no, that's not possible?
You know, I think there's a couple things. When you're very first starting out on this journey and you're the only one you know who is dreaming a dream no one else has, who has a calling no one else that you know has, I say protect it. Don't tell everyone you know. Because number one, they're never going to be your audience and they'll never be your customer.
Mm,
Like to this day, my friends have never been my customers. The people that I know personally they don't read my stuff. I mean, they're not my people in that way, right? They're my people in a different way. And so I think there's a lot of fear that most people have when they get started, because then they'll go out and they'll talk to their current circle or their current friends about it. And it's comparing apples to oranges. Like, of course, they're not going to tell you to go for it. Probably. I mean, no one in my life did. Of course, they're probably going to sit here and say, like, keep that seed protected. Let the work speak for itself. Let the success speak for itself. Let it get to the place where people are like, what are you doing? Like, well, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of cool. Like, how did that, like, let them come to you about it. Because I think otherwise it's such a vulnerable place to be in for most people. And all it takes is one person to shoot your dream down and to keep you in the box that, we're all in. And if you have decided that you want something more than that, and that you're called for more than that, then let you showing up and you doing the work, let that speak for itself. Success always speaks for itself.
It's so powerful. We talked about when I hit record that, over the last 5 years, you've gone from one book to now 3 books. And I always like when people write multiple books, because it's almost like the evolution of them, right? Like it's
Sure.
literally, you can see their life in real time. So
Yep.
talk a little bit about your newest book and where the ideas came from, because I think there's so many nuggets of wisdom throughout the book that you've really kind of garnered over your entire lifetime, really.
For sure.
But what made you want to dive so deep into so many different topics?
Yeah, so this is the new one. It's all the things I wish I knew. Has 80 life lessons for women. And, it really came out of, I had a coaching circle for about 3 years that was for women, where, once a week I would get on and coach women on literally anything. It was anything they were working on. And there were so many repeat topics that just kept coming up, and there were women from all over the world on these calls. And so I really started to kind of gather this understanding of various things that we all go through that is, a lot of us can relate to, and not just women, by the way. There's tons of advice in there that's very more generic than that, that anyone can gain from. But I really started to see like how similar we really are, and how there's so many of us dealing with things like imposter syndrome, or moving past our financial blocks or our worthiness blocks, or whatever the case is. And my life has been, I feel like I've lived 10 lives. Forget the 9 that the cat lived. I've lived at least 10. And in every iteration, I've learned so much, and it impacts my coaching in every way. I just had an event in Italy where I had a small group retreat, and we were doing, small coaching sessions. And I don't think there's ever a coaching session where I haven't shared what I've been through as an example to whatever it is I'm trying to teach. It just is kind of that vast knowledge that I've gained over the years, that has been a lot of it through hardship, a lot of it through immense struggle and adversity and really difficult times, but trying to figure out how you get through that quicker, how you stop it from repeating, how you grow instead of kind of going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, like how you transcend. And so I think, everyone was like, wow, you have 80 things to share. I was like, honestly, that was a cool down. It was going to be 101, but my editor was like, okay, cool it down a little bit.
Yeah. It's funny. I think about you writing 3 books, and I've now been writing 1 book I've switched topics, so we won't even count the original topic I was going with, but this last one for, 8-9 months. And, I think it's a skill in itself to be able to sit down and write a book and get that information out on the page. So I just wanted to take a second and acknowledge you for being able to do that, because I think books make a massive impact in the world that lasts forever. Podcast interview is one thing. You're listening to this while you're working out, or you're doing the dishes, or you're whatever, driving to work. a book is something that really sinks in. I think when you're reading words off of a page, and I think that's the driving force behind me actually wanting to get this book done more than anything else. But with that being said, you'd mentioned adversities that you've gone
Yeah.
through and how you openly share them, and it's all part of the journey. Do you feel like, and I think this is an interesting conversation people have, do you feel like adversities are a necessity for massive success?
I really do, because they, they always say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And whenever you're going through one of those dips, you just want to smack someone in the face who says that to you. I've been, as you might have guessed, I've been through lots of those. But I think it truly does build the person that you are always becoming. And I have this thing where I want to becoming the woman I'm meant to be till the day I die. If I'm 110 or whatever, like I will always be becoming her. And through that, you are learning from every one of those hard knocks. You're learning through all those times someone said no, all those times the doors were slammed in your face and people were like, you're not the one. And you're coming back and you're saying, should I believe that? Or should I go back to what I know? Should I narrate this conversation in my head for myself versus listen to what everyone around me is telling me? And there are seasons in your life where you go through just knock after knock after knock, and it feels like the whole world is against you. And if anyone has ever gone through that, prayers up, because I've been through it several times. It's not fun. But if you can learn from those, and I am always asking myself, what is this supposed to be teaching me? I want to get that lesson faster, more efficiently, so I can get out of it and move on. And what I've noticed is, I mentioned with the 8 boards or so that I've manifested over the years, they come with massive up levelings. And I'm talking crazy up levelings where like, boom, everything in your life is next level. But almost every time I go through a space of adversity first. And it's not my favorite thing in the world, but I can sense it now and understand it in a way that it is flushing me out. It is clearing the vision. It is releasing the toxins, if you will. It's setting up my circle. It is teaching me the lessons that I am going to absolutely need in that next version of my life to be able to sustain that success and grow. If I had gotten everything that I had wanted 5 or 10 years ago, oh my God, like I would have said back then I was ready for it, but I was not ready for it. So everything that you go through hones your skills, makes you better. The advice that I was able to give in book 3, a lot of that information I didn't have until I had worked for 3 years once a week with women from all over the world. Like that made me a better coach. It made me way more understanding of what people go through, but then also what works and what doesn't. Right. So I couldn't have written that book 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And my son plays football for the University of Oregon. And, we talk about this a lot. He was home last weekend. And one of the things that is difficult, for him, he's pursuing his dream too, is when he comes up against adversity, when you have a new situation or, a new player comes in and takes your spot or this, that, or the other thing. And you come back to that big dream and you say, why am I doing this in the first place? What are those moments I wanted? And is that still in alignment with who I am and what I want? And if it is, then guess what? There ain't nothing you can throw in my path that is going to convince me otherwise. Yeah. I'll find a way over it. I'll find a way under it or around it.
I love it. And I love the story of your son manifesting this dream, and you have pictures of him being a Ducks fan and now, playing as a center for the team. It's really, really cool to see that your kids have taken on what you've lived. I will say this, although I'm officially a new stepdad, I've been a bonus dad for, 4+ years. And it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
For sure.
So many obstacles and so many lessons for myself, from patience to reaction to all of these things.
To learning how to communicate in a totally different way, right? It's
like even the words they use. I'm like, those words aren't even real
everything.
Words. Yeah. And it's crazy. So talk a little bit about how, you were able to lead your children down a path of living this manifestation life and understanding that they can live their dreams, because a lot of parents do the opposite, and they hold their kids back based off of their own limiting beliefs.
100%. And, I think my first kind of football story with Kanan was when I made my second future board way back when we were still struggling and I was barely getting off my feet. And we had just seen the movie The Blind Side, and I was kind of joking, but I was like, hey, let's put something on my board that you want to do. What do you want to do, son? And we were Ravens fans. We used to, watch the Ducks and the Ravens every weekend in the fall. And he was like, Mama, I want to go to a Ravens game and I want to meet Michael Orr. And I was just like, oh shit. Like there was totally that part of parenthood that comes in that's like, oh my God, I don't want to disappoint my kid. I know I can't deliver that for him. So why would I want him to dream of something that I can't do? And there was truly a moment of filter that was coming up. And I think most people filter their dreams all the time. And that was one of my biggest moments of filter. And I remember just going, well, I can't tell him anything is possible and dream big. And then be like, can we not put this on the board?
Yeah.
And so honestly, it helped keep me honest. And I was like, okay, let's put it on the board. And of course, I think I told the story on the first one. So, your listeners already know it, but a year and a half later, we're at Ravens Stadium and he's meeting Michael Orr, for the first time. And so that was really the start of his football dream. And it was a crazy manifesting story that the whole time it was happening, I was sharing with him how. I was like, hey, remember when we put that on the board? Remember, well, look at this. This just happened. And look, I just met this person. And oh my God, this. And should we go? And so I was involving him. And I think that's another thing that most parents don't do. They kind of stay up here on the parent pedestal and keep their kids down here. And communication is all about what's happening today or soccer practice or whatever. Communicate with your kids, share those things. So everything that I manifested his whole life, he knew the origin, he knew every little step along the way. We as a family celebrated every single win, all the way through. So they would look at my boards and they'd be like, oh, cool, Paris is on your board. Someday we'll go to Paris, and they weren't like, when and da-da-da. They were just like, oh, that's cool. And so as things would unfold, I was always keeping them in the loop and I was showing, this is how that process works. Look at that. This is how this works. So he made his first board in 7th grade, I think. And he put an organ helmet on it and the organ gloves with the O. And, his manifesting story is a big, long one and it's crazy, but needless to say, he overcame insane odds. His senior year was in the middle of COVID where there was no season and no recruiting. And this kid went out and recruited himself, like did all of it by himself, learned how the process worked. And in the 11th hour, got an offer as a preferred walk-on at the University of Oregon. And he's in his 3rd season now. And his last year was the backup center for most of the year. And has been living his dream and has made the travel team more times than not. And it's been incredible, but there's an insane amount of hustle, insane amount of work, insane amount of days where you doubt yourself and you're like, why am I doing this? And you come back to that dream. I'm telling you, the dream is the thing that keeps you going.
I love it. So to think that this is such a real thing for so many people, and you've taught so many people around the world to be able to do this for themselves, and they're doing it day in and day out and living their dream life. How important is it to create experiences or opportunities versus creating the money that will allow you to get that opportunity? Does that make sense as a question?
Totally. So my whole manifesting method is really built on experiences over things, especially when it comes to the physical future board, like the one that's behind me. And that's one of the key differentiators between what I teach and old school vision boards. It is very much about what is that moment going to be like when I'm living it? Again, that movie in my head. The first time I walked through a tunnel, or the first time, a kid asked me for my autograph, or the first time someone knows my name, or whatever. Like those are the things that you're pulling on, because those are the things that make you want to get up and hustle at 4:30 in the morning when no one else is doing it, right? Because you're like, there's going to come a day. It's my favorite saying to always keep me motivated. There will come a day when XYZ is going to happen, and I'll drop into that, right? And so by doing that, I'm naturally focusing on the moment and the experience, which is, by the way, lined up with my emotion. That's how I'm pulling emotion. That's how desire is coming into play. That's how, all of those, because emotion is the fastest manifester. It's like your multiplier, right? So that's how joy, anticipation, excitement, all of those are amazing manifesting multipliers. You want them, they're gold. So the more times that I'm thinking about it from that perspective, the more times it auto generates motivation and all the rest of the pieces to it, versus the old way where you just grab a bunch of magazines and throw random crap on a board. How is that ever supposed to motivate really anybody? Number one, it's not custom. It's not your thing. It's not your dream car. It's the one that was in this month's issue of whatever. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so everything that I teach is not focused on the money. The money is part of, so we have 5 core categories that every future board has, and financial abundance is one of 5. And that is almost the after effect, right? Because a crazy thing can start to happen. You can start to manifest these moments and experiences way before you could ever, quote unquote, pay for them. So when we manifested this insane Michael Orr experience, trip cross country, at the time, our house had been flooded and I was living in a Red Cross hotel and I had just been let go of my job. I had no income. Like, the way that thing manifested, I couldn't write a script. That was, it was insane. So there's no way in the world I could have paid for that experience. Hey, it's not for sale. It's one of those priceless ones that you couldn't buy if you wanted to. So me allowing the dream to exist, allowing my son to have the dream and not kill it for him, allowed the universe to deliver it. Just, here you go. The whole trip cost me like $110. Yeah. And that was with flight, hotel, food, everything. So you can start to manifest regardless of whatever your financial situation is. Those opportunities can come to you in just these most incredible and magical ways. But it was because I was focusing on the moment and the experience, and it made me excited and anticipatory. So when it happened, what was I? Excited, hopeful, anticipating, grateful. And all those moments matched, right? It matched that emotional state that I had created way back when I was at, honestly, a humongous low in my life. So yeah, that is one of the reasons why our focus is that way. But then financial abundance starts to show up in your life in all kinds of beautiful and amazing ways you never expected as well.
Yeah. And it's funny, like some big things that I'm manifesting in my life, no timeline, right? Just knowing one day it'll happen, is a home in the two vacation homes in places that we love going as a family. One is Chatham, Massachusetts. The other is Ocean City, New Jersey. And I always pay attention to like winks from the universe to say you're on the right path. When you're doing these things. Like, we were just in Chatham on our family vacation. We just rent an Airbnb or whatever when we go up there. And then as I was driving home, I was really visualizing, what would it be like? What's the home that I want? What's the inside look like? Where, is there a pool? Is it by the pond? Is it whatever? And so, you get clear on that. And then just today they released flights from New York, because I thought to myself, like, oh, well, how often am I going to get up there? It's 7 hours each way. Like, it's a pain in the ass. And they just announced flights with American Airlines from New York to Hyannis, which is like 20 minutes from Chatham. And so I go, okay, that's a wink from the universe to go, this is supposed to happen, because now here's your opportunity. And I think it's important to pay attention to all those little things to keep pushing you forward. Is that kind of what you noticed in your life as well?
Oh, 100%. Like, you have to be, that's where that clarity comes in, right? So that when the opportunity comes along, it's an immediate ding, 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 right? The little bells go off. You're like, ooh, that's like, you recognize it because you had intentionally put it out there. So something that someone else would totally miss or never connect the dots on, or think like, oh, that's silly, don't do it. You all of a sudden know, like, hey, this is the universe putting together the puzzle pieces for me. And I want to make really clear that when that happens, a lot of times it's still very scary to take action. Like I said, when the Michael Orr thing happened, I was just overnight in this terrible financial situation. It felt like everything I'd worked for had just got wiped out under my feet. It was horrible. It was a perfect storm of like all this stuff going on. And I just remember keeping the faith, going somehow, some way, this is going to turn out better than I expected. Like, I'm going to close my eyes and talk myself through this and get through it on the other side. And that kind of dark space that happened catapulted me into all these ways that show up today in my business. It was my first speaking gig that I got. We got a national commercial for the Red Cross that aired for 3 years. Because of that, just like all these opportunities kind of opened with that. But the first kind of thing that happened to make the Michael Orr thing happen was I started working with one of their, old former players. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. He'd like come to me and wanted to book a session, and then just casually mentioned, hey, if you ever go back there, just let me know and I'll make sure you have tickets. And, and I was like, well, damn it, I don't have any money right now. This is a terrible time. And then it must have been like later that week or whatever, I got a notification that my miles, because the whole year before I had been doing corporate sales and traveling a ton, was like, oh, here's your mileage balance. And I was like, oh, that's way more than I thought. And I go on, and it was the day that the mileage tickets were on this crazy flash sale. And I got 2 tickets for exactly the miles I had. So like, those are all but still it was scary. I was still like, oh God, like,
Oh yeah.
I don't want to spend $100 right now. Like I'm in that kind of position. So acting on faith and saying, I don't know exactly how this is going to work out, but I know for a fact, this is lining up for me in a really obvious way. I know this is something I asked for. Do I trust the universe to step out and act on faith? And almost in every big manifestation I've ever had, there's always been a moment where I had to act on faith, and it wasn't 100% clear how it was going to turn out. But by doing that, and especially by doing it, over and over for the last 10 years, those decisions get a lot easier. I can see them a mile away now and be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Closing my eyes and jumping off the cliff, because here we go.
Just get comfortable getting uncomfortable, right? Like that's how you create success in your life. Like people are always like, when's the last time you were nervous to do something? I'm like, all the damn time. Like all the time. Like every time I say yes to the next thing, I'm nervous about it. Right?
Yep.
It's so true. But I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on the show. And I have no idea if I asked this question 5 years ago. It may have started after that. So either way, we're not going to remember the question.
I wouldn't remember it anyway.
Yeah, it's a 2-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Ooh, my definition of success is that I am currently living a version of my dream, right? It might not be the ultimate one that I want. I might be dissatisfied in the fact that I'm not where I want to be. Everyone has those days. But at the end of the day, I can take that moment and be grateful and understand, like, there were days where I would have given anything to wake up in this life. And I think that is always grounded me and always helped check me, because all I have to do is look back to the millions of difficult experiences I've had in my life and say, I used to dream of this life. So if I can always say that to myself, then I know that I am living my version of success, and that it will just continue to grow and multiply in that same vein. And 3 things that I do every day is I show up in one way or the other. It does not mean I show up on social media or in ways that everybody sees. I'm not super great at that or super consistent at that. But I show up for myself and my business 5 days a week. I give myself the weekends. I don't do a damn thing on the weekends, but be present and be with my kids and all of that. But during the week, I'm always doing something. I am always working on both my business and my goals and my dreams and the various iterations. And if there's part of it that isn't working, then I will pick another part that does have momentum and is working until it kind of raises the vibration for me. So I think wanting it bad enough to show up on good days and bad, no matter what, has been the key. And this is the longest job I've ever had in my entire life. I just realized that the other day. It's like, oh my God, I've been doing this almost 7 years. Wow. I think before that, my longest job was like 2 years. So,
yeah,
it's showing up.
Now I have to think about that. Have I been an entrepreneur longer than anything else I've ever done?
I can't believe I hadn't thought about it before. Just the other day it dawned on me. I was like, oh my God, you've done this twice as long as you've ever done anything, almost
Yeah.
3 times as long as I've done anything else.
I think I may have just passed being an entrepreneur longer than my longest job. I think I may have just passed it, which is wild to think about. Like
Yes.
absolutely insane because and just to see the evolution over the years.
Right.
And I think when you push through those hard times, and this is for people listening to hear this, right? When you push through those hard times of financial struggle, which happens in entrepreneurship, and sometimes it happens more than once. When you push through those times, you realize that you're always going to build off of the foundations that you're building today. So it gets easier. And then your struggles are at a different level. Like, it's just a new way of thinking as an entrepreneur. And so like, I think the world needs more entrepreneurs. They need more people chasing their dreams. They need more people creating future boards and going after them. And obviously I hope that you and I are people that are encouraging people to do it, right? Like to understand that if we can do it, anybody can do it.
Exactly. I had no idea what I was doing. Let me tell you, for the first 4 years, probably still to this day, half the stuff I do, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm figuring it out as I go.
Yeah, that's it. And I always tend to figure it out last minute too.
Right.
the beauty of it all, right?
Exactly.
And so I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, and I know I did wrap up with this question with you 5 years ago because it's been literally since day one. But before we get there, what's all the good stuff? How do people get a hold of you? Where can they follow you? Where can they get information about your next meetup? What's all the good stuff?
Yeah, so Instagram is probably the best place. It's just Sarah Centrella. The link in my bio will take you to everything you need to know. Yeah, books, courses, masterminds, coaching, the whole nine. It's all there.
I love it. I love it. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth? But for you, in the last 5 years since we last spoke, what has been your biggest moment of growth? Because these things happen all the time.
Oh, I would say coming through COVID and learning how to, like everybody else, just adapt on the fly in a huge way when it came to my business, right? Because at that point I was 3 years or so into my business and just getting it to the place where, it wasn't panicking on a daily basis and all of those things. And then to just be hit with what COVID initially did, and to be able to just think on my feet and try and figure it out and look at like, how can I still serve people? Like, what does this look like? And then just lean all in. I think that taught me so much about entrepreneurship, taught me so much about who I am and about sticking to what I believe in hard times and peaks and all that kind of stuff. And so coming out of that, I think 100% I was stronger across the board. I think I'm a much better coach now because I coach like a mad woman because everyone was on Zoom, so yeah, I think across the board it made me so much stronger, so much more resilient, so much more committed and passionate about what I do in a way that initially did not feel good. It wasn't fun initially, but it was one of those things that in hindsight definitely was for the best.
Yeah, I love it. Sarah, thank you so much for coming back on the show and sharing your wisdom and constantly pouring into, my people and my group, coming to my event and speaking to my mastermind. Like, I'm honored to have you every single time. So thank you so much.
Same. I love everything that you're doing. And thank you for keeping me in your circle. I love this. Thanks so much for having me.